My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. I want to apologize a little bit early right now. My allergies are kind of kicking up, so you're going to hear me. I'm going to sound a little bit congested. Do apologize for that. I might be sniffling here and there throughout the show, but it is that season, guys, so I do apologize for that. All right. Today, I want to talk about those feelings around safety in relationships that show up way too early. And I think a lot of us, if not all of us, know what that feels like. It's not the kind that's actually built, it's the kind that's been tested. That's the kind that of safety that really just comes in quick and then gets taken as something real before it's actually had any time to prove itself. And it usually starts off really small and simply. A response from somebody that just lands really well and we take it to heart, you know, um, they caught something you said that you actually didn't expect them to catch, right? And they don't even miss the obvious things that most people miss, right? And you feel these things, you connect to them. They're not big and they're not dramatic. They're just enough that something in you starts to settle and go, God, this is familiar. I feel seen. We start saying things like, no one's ever seen me like this before. I've never felt this before, right? And that second starts doing a whole lot of this work. Now, before I get into it, as I always do, I want to say thank you to all of you who keep showing up, listening, sharing the show, reaching out about our conversations. Um, I'm getting some really interesting emails now. Italy, Poland, Algeria, very interesting about what's going on down there. I would love to talk to you more if you want to email me and talk. And the other cities and countries around the world, thank you. Right? A couple of you, actually, one of you specifically out of Italy this past week inspired a writing because of something they wrote. Right? So all this stuff, this show is all about you all. Right? Because you all keep showing up, keep listening. So if you do follow me on a place like Spotify, go through the app, rate this show 5 stars. And the reason why, this helps others find the conversations you found. Lets them feel heard, understood, maybe answer something for them. If you're going to follow along on YouTube, like and subscribe over there. You're going to know when every new episode drops weekly, right? And ultimately, as we keep pushing this forward, right now, there is no paywall. Somebody asked me again, am I think about like Patreon or something? No, I'm not. I want to let you all know I have opened up the show again to sponsors. So if somebody is looking, it's got to fit too. It's got to be a good thing. There is somebody I am talking to. It's a big toy company. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. Right. But in the meantime, if you want to support the work I do, there is a donation link in the show. Anything big or small does help these conversations keep going. All right. Now that's out of the way. Let's talk about that moment when we're like, man, this is just clicking, right? Because what I want to get into today is how quickly something like that turns into meaning, and we make it mean something, right? It's not slow, and we don't even do this over time. We do this within days, sometimes hours, right? It's fast. Boom, we're there. And the mind just starts connecting things that haven't actually been connected yet, right? It starts building something that feels solid enough to trust. And once it feels that way, people move like it is, even when nothing has really been tested. We actually see this in something else. I don't know if I want to introduce this right now. Actually, I'm kind of even doing it. I tell you something and don't tell you, and then it makes you want to listen to figure out if I'm going to tell you. It's a psychological concept. Um, it's being used heavily right now in social media. It's the lead in, right? They present you it's like putting 2 Legos in front of you that don't even necessarily fit, but they give you one piece of information for each thing, and your mind then makes the connection, right? So that happens a lot. It's happening a lot right now on social media. And I'll give you an example. Again, I said I wasn't going to do this. I'm going to do it. Basically, what happens is they say, man was found unalived at, we have to say this now because you know what? They turn off your show if you don't. Man was found unalived at his apartment, news at 6. You go watch the news at 6, and then the next part of it says, the next piece of information I give you is, um, hey, the police are now interviewing the girlfriend about this. Now, that's all I tell you. Those are those two pieces of information that your brain has. Those are those two Lego pieces. Now, they don't even necessarily connect. Just because they're interviewing her doesn't necessarily mean that she did it, right? But what's going to happen is your mind's going to fill in the space. You're going to make them connect, right? It's the same thing here, right? Kind of a long ways to get what I'm talking about, but I went a different direction. No, this isn't about murder. What this is talking about here is sometimes we are connecting something that isn't necessarily built because our mind is filling a space. And that's what's happening when we look at something like the concept of safety in relationships, right? All right. So, first, why this moment feels so convincing. And what makes these moments really that strong for us isn't just that they feel good, it's that a few specific things line up at the same time. And the brain moves on all of these little things faster than we actually can catch up cognitively. Now, first, we start with the timing. Sorry, guys, I'm really just trying to battle this. I'm not doing well. Let's start with the timing here. If that interaction happens when you're already a little bit more open, be willing to meet someone, you're kind of yearning for it a little bit. Maybe you've been dealing with people who haven't, been getting you, or you've had to explain yourself over and over, and it just you're over all that stuff. It's going to land a little bit different. Not because it's objectively better, but because where you are when it shows up, that same exchange, different day, it might not even register. But the catch is here that the moment that it strikes and it's right, it's going to stick. And then there's this whole part about being seen. And this is where people underestimate it. It's usually not in some sort of big or impressive way, right? It's really small. The other person you're interacting with, they pick up on something you don't fully spell out, right? They can see it. Or maybe they come back to you with a comment that's, right on point. They're not missing what you said. They literally heard you. You don't even have to correct them, right? You're not reframing what you said or what you've meant. That removal of friction matters more than a lot of people understand because most interactions have some level of drag in them, and that's just typical. They don't all move at hyper speed, right? So when the drag isn't there, even briefly, that kind of conversation is going to stick out. It's going to feel clean, maybe easy. There's a whole lot of alignment. There's, no real effort here, right? And that's going to get read as something that's actually deeper than it might actually be. Now, let's add in the next part. The next layer in this wonderful emotional cake here is attention. And this is not just generalized attention, but attention that is directed. Like it's actually on you, not just being handed out in some broad or inconvenient way or generalized way. The kind of attention that narrows things directly to you and focuses on you. It creates a sense that people aren't used to getting consistently in their lives, right? So this carries a lot more weight when it shows up. Now, if you put these three things together, timing, being seen, and focused attention, you've got something that feels solid really quickly. Right now, the cake's being prepared. We're putting it in. We're going to bake that sucker. Here comes the psychology of all of this. What happens here is the brain is actually wired to reduce uncertainty. It doesn't like sitting in open loops. So when something feels like it fits, it starts organizing it right away. There's a rapid emotional encoding going on. So the moment here gets tagged as important. There's a small dopamine release, right, from the recognition. It feels good, especially when it's getting reinforced. And at the same time, our attachment systems start activating just enough that we lean forward and we lean towards it. So instead of holding it as one interaction, our brain starts building this whole narrative around it. That's where things get interesting because it fills in what hasn't been shown yet. And that's the part people start missing. The feelings here are real, but the interpretation isn't even tested yet. And once that interpretation locks in, people stop watching what's actually happening and they start moving based on what they think it means. So, this is where we're going to get into the signals that people mistake for safety. Right? And this is where people start getting it wrong in a much more concrete way because they're not just feeling something, they're pointing to things and using those isolated moments as evidence. And the problem is, most of what they're pointing to are signals, not proof. So here comes the first one. Let's take confidence, for example. Someone shows up with a strong presence, they're clear, there's no hesitation. They seem like they know what they're actually doing. And that reads as, guess what? Stability, control. And people translate that into safety. But confidence only tells you how someone presents, not how they behave when something doesn't go their way. You haven't seen them under pressure yet. So calling it safety is a jump. Now, here's the next one. The same with experience. Time in the space, years in the lifestyle, numbers of partners, whatever it is people use to measure it. Experience can mean exposure, without a doubt, and it can mean repetition, but it doesn't automatically mean awareness or restraint. That is the difference. Someone can do something for a very long time and still repeat the same patterns the entire way through it. But people see time and assume growth happen inside of it. That's an assumption. Now, then the next one here is my favorite one, intensity. We've talked about this all over the last few weeks, right? And this one gets people fast. Strong emotional connection, deep conversations early on, feels like things are moving quickly, but they're meaningful. And it feels real because it's charged. Intensity, though, just means something is happening at a higher level of emotion. It doesn't tell you if this thing is stable, even if it's sustainable. It just tells you it's loud enough to feel. And people confuse loud with solid all the time. And here's my other favorite one, and I love this one, validation. Being told you're understood or appreciated or seen in a way that feels good, right? None of that changes what's going on. Now, there is validation in that moment. It is a response. It doesn't tell you what happens when there's a disagreement or when something isn't easy to affirm. If the only thing you've seen is support, you haven't seen the full range yet. All of these are signals. They're pointing at something and they're suggesting something may even be there, but they can't confirm it. The issue is what the mind does with those signals. It doesn't just leave them as a possible, right? It starts completing the picture, right? So this goes into pattern completion. You get a few pieces of this puzzle, and instead of waiting for more of them, your brain just starts filling in the rest so it can move forward with a clear idea of what it is. And then guess what? Confirmation bias kicks in. So once the story starts forming here, people look for things that support it and overlook the things that don't. Not intentionally, it's just how our system works. It wants consistency in the narrative it just built. It's not going to work against itself. So a handful of signals turn something, right, that feels like evidence into all of it, even though it's not. And once that happens, people stop evaluating what's actually in front of them and start relating to what they believe is there. And that's where the disconnection starts. So, what actually defines safety? That's a wonderful question. So, if those things aren't safety, what actually is? Well, I say this time and time again, but this is where we actually have to slow things down, especially whether people like this or not, because nothing gets here, nothing how we get here is decided quickly. Real safety doesn't come from just a moment. It's patterns, it's repetition. It's not just once or twice, but it's longevity, consistency. It's not how someone shows up when things are great or paying attention, but how they are over time and that same tone, the level of their engagement, the way they respond when there isn't really anything special happening. Cool, I'm excited to sit and watch movies and fold laundry with you. Yay, right? Let's get a pizza and celebrate. That type of stuff. No spikes, no drop offs, right? Just steady. And the steadiness matters more than anything impressive early on because it removes the guesswork. You're not trying to figure out who you're getting every time, it's already been shown to you. And it's ironic because I just talked about this morning with somebody. I talked about boundaries, and this is where they come in. And this is not just whether someone can say they respect them, but whether they actually do without needing to push them, test them, or even negotiate every time someone gets close, right? And that's where a lot of people get tripped up because one good response is taken as proof. It's not. What matters is whether the boundary holds without pressure being applied to it. When that is, happens consistency, it creates something stable. There's a line and it stays at the line. From here, we look at what happens when things aren't smooth. Because it's easy to be steady when everything is working. That doesn't tell you too much. The real information shows up when something is off. Someone's late, there's a miscommunication, you disagree, right? You said something and somebody else, misinterpreted what you said. So do they stay the same in how they handle it, or does everything shift, right? Do we see a multi-headed rage monster in front of us, which has typically been somebody that's been calm, cool, and collected, right? That's where you see if the structure behind it, or it was just situational. And here's one of my favorites: alignment. When someone says, what they do and they are consistent, it's not big and it's definitely not obvious, but the smaller repeated moments, if none of those match even slightly, those start to add up. And over time, those gaps create instability, whether it's acknowledged or not. And here, the psychology side of all of this is really quite straightforward. Trust isn't built from a couple of isolated moments, it's built through repetition. I'm going to show up at 5 o'clock. I'm here at 5 o'clock. I will be here tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I'm here tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So on and so forth. We're going to go out to dinner and go from there. We go out to dinner and we go from there. Repetition, right? The nervous system is tracking patterns constantly. It's not asking if something felt right once, it's asking if something is holding. And when it does, consistency over time, it's, the system doesn't need to keep checking it. It just knows that's where safety actually sits. Not how something feels just early on, but in what continues to show up week after week, month after month, after those feelings pass and you see them being regulated. And you see this very early on in relationships, especially when we are in the honeymoon phase. Oh my God, we're going to run off and live on an island and we're going to have sex every day and it's going to be fantastic. Well, you know what? After about 6 months, that's going to get old real quick. And then we get into the little things, the real picadillos about somebody there, and, the little quirks about them. That's where the real relationship takes off. And then we are discovering, if we even get to that point, whether it's worth it, whether we want to stay in the dynamic or not. Right? But here's the real indicator: when something goes completely off script. And this is where it actually becomes clear and it doesn't show up, in these good moments or when everything is just lining up the way you would expect. It shows up when something is just, wow, it went sideways badly, right? Maybe your boundary gets tested. That's a really good one to start. And we start there because that's an easy one to miss if you're not paying attention, right? Because if you're not paying attention here and somebody pushes again on your boundary every like 3 weeks, right? Over time, you might start loosening it, right? But then you start, it might be a question that leans a little too far. They shift that tone, they push past something that was already established. It doesn't have to be obvious to matter. The moment it's there, the interaction has changed. Maybe it's even something uncomfortable gets said, right? Not even harsh or aggressive, just honestly, that creates underlying tension. Right? And somehow it doesn't even get smoothed over right away. There's just kind of this weird, awkward laugh, ha ha ha, right? We just kind of don't know really what to say. And now a gap has been created between two people that has to be addressed instead of avoided. But what do most of us do? We sit in a ladder, we avoid it. Or another one is our expectations long term don't match up. Yeah, I want to bounce around the world and live a bohemian lifestyle. Well, cool. I just got out of law school and I'm starting at a firm. Those two lifestyles are probably not going to match up. Those expectations aren't going to be there, right? If you have one person that's moving in a certain direction and the other person isn't, or they're moving in the opposite, now you have friction that definitely wasn't there before. So assumptions here start to fall apart. And what felt aligned in the beginning suddenly isn't, right? That's the moment that matters, not what caused it, but how it's handled. Now, up until that point, everything can still be carried by alignment. Things feel good. Our responses are tracking. Nothing is really being challenged. But once the pressure in the interaction starts, even any small amount, that's when you see what's underneath. So what you see, that's when you notice and discover each other's real fortitude, right? The question becomes whether the response stays steady, whether it shifts. And that shift isn't very dramatic here, right? It could show up in very small undertones. And it can be easy to overlook if you're focused on just keeping everything smooth. If a tone changes or somebody pulls back or they start getting defensive or they're avoiding conversations or they redirect so they don't have to talk about something, right? None of this is giving you something definitive, but it definitely doesn't need to escalate to tell you something important. All of these things are information, they're data points. And this is where the psychology really becomes visible, right? I'm doing this a little bit more psychological today because I think we need to understand some of these feelings, what to look for. Because when there is pressure, our systems react: fight, flight, fawn, freeze, flop, right? And they're not necessarily in a clinical sense, but just in the behavioral sense. Some people push back harder, right? Than, why are you yelling when I'm only talking about I need to pick up some eggs, right? They overreact or they withdraw, create distance. Some might try to just soothe the situation really too quick. Some people shut down or they just don't want to talk altogether, right? Everyone has a pattern. And this is when it shows that there's real structure behind what you've been seeing. It holds even when there is a little tension. The responses stay grounded, the interactions get handled directly, and nothing needs to be avoided or reshaped to make it easier. If there isn't, this is where it starts to break. That's why this moment carries more weight than anything before, because you're no longer dealing with how something feels. You're seeing how it functions under pressure. So, why do people keep getting this part wrong? And this is a big section here. This is the part I think a lot of people don't like sitting with. And it's why, quite honestly, these things keep repeating themselves. Most people want clarity early, right? They want everything laid out. They don't want it eventually, and they definitely don't want it over time. They want it hot, fresh, and now. They want to know what something is, where they stand, what they're dealing with. The pull for clarity shows up really quickly. And once it does, it starts shaping how people interpret everything that follows. So sitting in uncertainty isn't comfortable. It means you don't have a clear read on the situation yet. And it means you're still watching, you're taking things in without deciding yet. Most people don't stay there very long because they don't want to. So what happens instead is they start assigning meaning to what they do have. A few good interactions is a sense of alignment, some, consistency in a tone, and that somehow gets turned into empirical evidence that this is actually phenomenal when we don't have enough proof to, make sure that's true. But this just feels close enough to make a call, so they make one. Not loudly, not even consciously, but it does happen. And once an internal decision is made, everything starts getting filtered through it. That's where the shift begins. So instead of observing what's happening over time and watching everything unfold, people start confirming what they already believe is there, even if it's not there. They notice what fits, they skip over what doesn't, So then the picture tightens around that early interpretation. So then guess what? It feels more solid, not because it's been tested, but because it's being reinforced. And this is how we then turn a signal into a conclusion. And from here, people start moving like it's some sort of definitive fact when in fact it's not. But what happens is they trust in it, they invest in it, they build on it, and even though the foundation hasn't actually even been established, there's nothing that's been laid, right? It's not that they don't know better, it's that they need that clarity, and that overrides the patience it takes to see what's real. And once that happens, they're no longer evaluating what's in front of them. They're just operating from inside of something that they decided too early on. Right? So as I bring this to a close for today, I've been kind of talking for a while. Interesting subject, something that comes up quite often in many, many different forms, right? There is a difference here between something that's right and something that's actually been proven inside of a dynamic or a relationship or anything else. And most people don't stay with that difference long enough to see it clearly. And that's the biggest point. We make decisions on what feels convincing to us, if it lines up, if it's settling inside of us, right? But by the time these theories of ours that we've equated to proof get tested, we are already so deeply invested in what we think, we're not willing to want to figure out whether this can handle a stress test. And that's where this gets all sorts of quiet because nothing has to feel wrong in the immediate. There's no clear signal that needs to be flashing at you telling you to slow down, right? But as this moves forward, you start carrying all this with you and you assume that whatever you're in is solid because it felt that way when you started 3 months ago. But what you're actually dealing with doesn't show up in those early moments. When things get more complicated is as the relationship evolves. So these things show up later and how they hold when stuff isn't easy or just, my work schedule changed. So meeting you on a Thursday night is no longer possible. And that's upsetting. So none of this is as clean as where it started out in the beginning. And then the tension is there. But it's quite late now because we've already assigned strength and foundation to something that hasn't even been cleared yet. Right? So here is the question I want to leave you with this week. When you think about something you've called safe, are you basing that on how it felt early or on what you actually seen hold over time? I'll probably ask you that again after I get done here. Right? Listen, not what you hope is there when I'm asking you this, not what it looked like at the start, but what's actually been consistent enough that you no longer have to question it. That's what I'm asking you in this question, because that's the real difference. So I want to address a couple of things. Um, somebody asked me about writing the other day. I don't really didn't really understand the question, and I still don't. So I said I'm going to kind of address it so you can hear it from me. Look, I have a large background, most of my life in some sort of first responder way. I've worked in law enforcement. I have worked in juvenile probation. Um, I worked in Washington, D.C. for doing analysis, and I'm going to kind of leave it at that. And then I worked in the military. A lot of my jobs and a lot of the places I've been to around the world, right? I think the last time I calculated, it was something about less than a third of this planet I've been to, right? There's still a lot of places I haven't. But let me explain something here. When it comes to what I write and how I write it and how I try to connect, and I've explained this before privately, every time I've ever searched for a feeling or an emotion online, it was described to me in an academic way. So that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't tell me how I feel. So I have all these experiences and cultures and people I have met throughout my lifetime and my 51 years on this planet. I can tell you this, that once I went back to school and I kind of sat through all this theory and I looked at this, it still didn't translate for me. So when I write or I speak or when I work with people, I do it in a way that you're going to understand and you're going to feel it so you can feel connected to those things because they're real, right? Otherwise, I'm going to give you an academic sermon. And I guess I'm going to tell you this, no one's going to read it. And I can also tell you this because I've seen another therapist that does this on social media that's in one of the spheres I inhabit. And they write these really long word vomiting posts that are in the upwards of over 18 to some have gone over 30 minutes, thousands of words that don't really even say a whole lot. And I don't even like reading it, right? Talk to me about how you feel. That's why when I pose these questions to you, I want you to connect to the feeling, not some sort of academic theory, right? So that's where this comes from. I have a world of looking at things that I've lived in prior to this that have shaped how I speak, think, and talk, right? That may be different, but that doesn't make me wrong. And I like the way I write. So this isn't calling anybody out. It's just an explanation. Okay. On a happier note, because I want to still keep pushing my agenda. Yes, it is an agenda of random acts of kindness. Really didn't feel well this past weekend, so I didn't get up to too much. But to make it up, I'm going back to the animal shelter because I just love animals. Um, so I'm doing that on Saturday morning at 8. I am probably not going to adopt, but I'm leaving my any financials at home. But I am going to go and help out with the animals on Saturday and Sunday. I'm going to go do some homeless stuff. Right, go work at I think I'm going to try to donate at the soup kitchen. I don't really like doing the service side. I don't mind cleaning. I'm fine with the cleaning. So I'm going to volunteer some time. That's all that matters. Right, give back to the community. Right, we're not above it. I've been doing it for decades. I'm not asking any of you to do it, but I'd like you just to try some sort of random act of kindness. Say hi to someone that's a stranger. Tell somebody they just randomly look nice. Hey, that's a nice color purple on you today. Make their day, right? If we want change, if we want this world to be better, it's got to start with us. You've heard me say this before, that is a psychological imperative. Because if we keep believing it's going to be somebody else, it's only going to ever be left to somebody else. And that, let me tell you right now, that somebody else is never going to come along. So do something, be nice, right? Help an old person with their groceries. I don't know. Do something, right? Random acts of kindness. My question, I'm going to come back to it for today's show, right? So these are the two things I want to hear some more. Some of you are telling me some really great stuff in the random acts of kindness. I'm loving it. Makes me feel good inside as a human being. So here's the question for this week one last time. When you think about something you've called safe, past relationships, maybe it's the one you're in. Are you basing that how it feels early on in that relationship, or on what you actually saw it hold over time? Right? Let me know that in the comments section. Come back to me. Let's talk about this. It's a really important discussion. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay kinky.